So let's continue on our journey as we talk about customer for life and our perspective that we carry. So last week, I introduced 3 stories to everybody. And there was 3 big points that I wanted everybody to get. If you missed last week, I strongly encourage you go back and watch the recording. So we have the totality of truth that we covered with the blind men and the elephant. We talked about the problem that I'm solving with the elevator and the problem that the building manager had with the slow elevators in the building. And then we talked about those Potemkin villages that we may have in our own personal lives and that we may have in our business when we're talking to our employees. Is this what I want to hear, or is this reality as we look at different situations? So I encourage you to listen to those stories if you haven't heard them before. But when we get perspective and we start looking through a variety of lenses, one of the things that's going to come out there is there's going to be polarities in viewpoints. There's going to be polarities in this way of thinking and the information we have. Whenever you have a polarity, we enter into conflict. And we can have internal conflict, and we can have conflict with those that are viewing things through a different set of lenses, through a different set of experiences, through a different way that they were brought up. And when we have conflict in and of itself is not good or bad. Conflict is neutral. It always has been a neutral concept. How you deal with conflict, however, is very, very important. And so that's what I wanted to give you as a tool, as a takeaway, as we kind of look at this and how do I thrive as an HVAC contractor. So there's a couple of different things that I need to look at when I start to think about conflict. And if you do text to the number, your address, I will send you one of these cards that's not showing up on the screen. But this particular card has these 8 attributes of a conflict situation on one side. And then it's going to have the 5 different reaction modes that we're going to be talking about. And I encourage you to carry this around with you. So when I do approach somebody that has a different viewpoint, I might be able to engage with them in a more intelligent conversation versus getting frustrated or upset. So the first question that we have to ask ourselves whenever there's conflict out there, is there overwhelming stress involved on either side? And so that's one thing that's really, really important when we're approaching conflict, to understand the stress level of both sides of that argument or both sides of that conflict. The next one, is this a simple situation? Is it yes, no? Or is it more nuanced? Is it more complex than that? Because the way that we approach that situation is going to be determined by the complexity of the situation that we're approaching. The next one we have is, how important is this topic to each person in the situation? So some people enter into conflict just because they enjoy the argument, and they will push the other person just to see how the other person responds, and it may not be important to them at all. On the flip side of it, it could be very important to one side of the argument, and that person is then going to enter that conflict a little bit differently. Is there sufficient time? Time is a big thing to understand. Do I have time to discuss this? If there's a fire in the building and I'm going to sit and argue with somebody about which exit we're going to go out of, there's not enough time for us to sit down and have a planning committee and collaborate and to do all of the other stuff that we want to do as we're going through it. We're going to pick a direction and we're going to go. And so there's different ways that we approach those conflicts depending on the time that we have available. Is there sufficient trust? So do I trust the person I'm talking with, or is there reason for me not to trust the person that I'm talking with? And this will be something that we have to consider. Do people have good listening and communication skills? So do I know that I'm being heard when I'm talking to the other person, or is that person not listening to what I'm saying and not valuing the information that I have to share? Do cultural norms and reward systems encourage people to share their true needs and concerns, or do those cultural norms shut that down? And then how important is the relationship to each person in the situation? So let me show you how this kind of plays out in the 5 different reaction modes. And if you want to learn more, I would encourage you to go to KillmanDiagnostics.com. There's a lot of great classes if you want to dive deeper into this, where you can learn more about the 5 different reaction modes and everything else. This is the Thomas Kilmann scale that we look at. And so there's 5 reaction modes that we have to any conflict situation that may be out there. We can be in a competing mode where I'm going to win and they're going to lose. We can be in the avoiding mode and just avoid the conflict altogether. We can be accommodating and allow the other person to win their argument. We can compromise, a little bit of give and take, and then we can collaborate. But how does this tie into the 8 attributes? So let's look at competing first. So when I look at competing, there's a couple of things that make competing successful. Number one, if the stress is high or moderate, that's when I'm going to be in a competing situation. Is the problem simple? Yes, it's a unidimensional. It's going to be a yes, no. It's very easy for us to work through. The problem's more important to me than maybe all of the other people that are out there. So now I'm going to be in a competing posture. There's little time for discussion. So we need to make a decision and we need to move. There's higher, moderate levels of trust. This is important in competing. I will completely shut everybody down if I have a position of authority over people. However, they do not trust me. And I will not get any pushback, and this will not be healthy for how I deal with conflict if I overexert the authority that I have. People can communicate their views. This is how the culture would be set up. The culture reward supports a win-lose dynamic, and people are not concerned with sustaining the relationship. So let's look at avoiding. When would avoiding be a good thing for us to use? So when we look at avoiding, number one, first thing, stress is going to be overwhelming, and so I can't deal with it right now. The problem is simple again, so it's a yes, no. The problem is not important. This is a key to avoiding. So if I'm going to use the avoiding posture, I know that this does not need to happen right now, and I don't have any time to discuss it. I may just shelve that for later when we can come back to it, and maybe I have some time to deal with it. So I'd avoid the situation at this point in time. There's low levels of trust exist. This is when I don't have those levels of trust, maybe, and it's not important. I'm going to put it off to the side, and we'll deal with this later. Interactions are typically ineffective anyways. They're not listening to what I have to say. The cultural reward system discourages confrontation, and people don't particularly care about relationships. When I move into collaborating, so now what I want to look at is the stress is stimulating in this case. Problem is complex, so I have multi-dimensions to the problem. And it's equally important to all parties involved, and we have time to discuss this. There's high levels of trust amongst all the people involved in the discussion, and the reward system encourages that we explore all of the opportunities. People want their relationships to improve or last in this particular situation. For the accommodating, stress is high or moderate. The problem is very simple, again, yes, no, and it's more important to others than it is to me. There's little time to discuss it. So at this point in time, if it's not important to me, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to let it go. Maybe I have moderate to low levels of trust here at this particular case. Again, it's not important to me. The cultural reward system penalizes when I counter people, and people are eager to please those around them. And then the last one that we have is compromising. This is when stress is high. Again, it's a yes-no situation. The problem is moderately important to all. So maybe there's equal amounts of importance to the viewpoints. There's little time for discussion. So at this point in time, it's going to be a little bit of give and take. I'll do this if you do this. And those interactions need to be handled in a respectful manner. This encourages quick fix, and it expects immediate results. And people are indifferent about their relationships in this particular situation. Like I said, if you are interested in learning more about the TKI and the different reaction modes, I would encourage you to go ahead and text your address to the number, and I will send these cards out to you. And I would also encourage you to go to Kilman Diagnostics and check out the many different courses and classes that they have available for you on this topic as you look at how do I handle conflict as we start to look at things through different lenses. Some vocabulary that I'd like you to take away. This summer, if you could put these into your vocabulary, this will be very helpful for everybody. And so there's a couple of different things for you to look at. Number one is going to be, in light of that new information, I've changed my mind. This can be really helpful when you're talking to others and you're trying to encourage that collaboration. Oh, I didn't know that before. I guess I was wrong. It's okay to admit we're wrong sometimes. And it's okay to move on and give people credit for what they bring to you. From the evidence provided, it appears that I need to rethink a couple of things. You make a strong argument. I'll consider what you said. I can't support my opinion. I don't know why I thought that. I never thought of it that way. Thank you. Now I will. And thank you for sharing that with me. How do you think we can improve on that? These additions to our vocabulary will help to encourage us to be able to approach conflict in a new and refreshed way instead of getting into that defensive posture. So take a way to look to engage with others versus being in a defensive posture. And I know that this will help you to be able to thrive in the new normal that we're in.